And if you want to be at the top, you have to be smarter and work harder than any of them. And working hard means working long hours. I mean, it also means working diligently, but in the final analysis, it's also an additive issue. If I'm smart and hardworking and I can crank out for 70 hours a week, and you do it for 30, it's like, in 2 years, I'm so far ahead of you, you will never, ever catch up. It may be that that unidimensionality is the price you have to pay to be exceptional at one thing, right? Because if you're going to be something like a genius level mathematician, and you want to do that or a scientist, say, it's like you're in your lab all the time, you're working 70 hours a week or 80 hours a week, you're smart, you're dedicated, you're unidimensional, and that's how you get to beat all the other people who are doing that. It's the only way. But the problem is you don't get a life. If you concentrate solely on your career, you can get a long way in your career. And I would say that that's a strategy that a minority of men preferentially do. That's all they do. They work like 70, 80 hours a week. They go flat out on their career. They're staking everything on the small probability of exceptional status in a narrow domain. But it's hard on them. They don't have a life. It's very difficult for them to have a family. Now, if you love being a scientist and you have that kind of focus of mind, well, first of all, you're a rare person, and second, you're going to pay for it. But fine, more power to you. But it's a risky business to do that. You sacrifice a lot for it. You know, and I would say most often, if you're speaking about having a healthy life, that isn't what you do. You spread yourself out more. So, you know, you have a family, you have some things that you do outside of work that are meaningful to you and useful. You have a network of friends. Well, those 3 things alone, or 4 things alone, are plenty to keep you well oriented. And then if one of those things collapses, you know, everything doesn't go. Now, the price you pay for that is the more you strive to optimize that balance, the less likely you are to be fantastically successful at any single one of them. But you might have a very, you know, if you consider your life as a whole, that might be a winning strategy. One of the things Carl Jung said, I really liked this. He thought that men went after perfection and women went after wholeness. So they're different value, they're different, there's something different at the top of the value hierarchy. So perfection would be stake it all on one thing and look for radical success. Not that all men do that, because they don't, but we're talking about extremes, at least with regards to the men that do that. The wholeness idea is more like, well, I want one thing in my life to be 150%, or I want 5 things in my life to be 80%. Well, there's a lot more richness in a life where you have 5 things operating at 80%, but you're not operating at any of them at 150%. So, and I really believe this because I've watched men and women go through their careers now for a long period of time, and one of the things there's lots of things that produce this. But one of the things that I've noticed is that mostly women in their 30s bail out of unidimensional careers. They won't do them. They won't put in the 80 hours a week that they would have to put in order to dominate that particular area. And it isn't, the reason that they won't do it is because they decide it's not worth it. And no wonder, because why would that be worth it? And I think maybe part of the reason too that women are oriented that way more than men, I think there's 2 reasons. One is socioeconomic status does not make women more attractive on the mating market, but it does make men more attractive. And the second is women's time frame is compressed, right? Because guys can always say, well, I'll have kids later. And they can say that till they're like 80. Whereas women, it's like, no way, man, you got to get it together by the time you're, let's say 40, but really probably by 35, but definitely by 40, because otherwise it ain't happening. And that's bloody dreadful. Like the most unhappy people you ever see, no. No. One of the common routes to extreme unhappiness is to want children and not have them. I wouldn't recommend that.
I don't care what your business is, men, women, you have to understand that you're going into a huge lifestyle change. And I tell people it's not for everybody. Don't do it if you don't have the stamina to get kicked around and driven into the ground and get up and do it again and beaten up by people that tell you This is not kumbaya stuff. This is hardcore stuff. And I meet many entrepreneurs that are in tears saying, I can't go on. I haven't seen, my significant other in 2 weeks. It happened to me in a class. I mean, I'm not sure how you're going to take this story, but I'm going to tell it to you anyways, okay? End of a class, 9 at night, 600 people. There's a fellow up at the top, puts up his hand and say, Mr. O'Leary, look, I have to ask you a question. I haven't said anything all class, but I'm really hurting. Can you help me? And I said, what's your problem? Class goes dead silent, because it's not going to be about business. And he said, today, my fiance came to me and said that I have to make a decision between our relationship and the business. And I said, oh, I'm not Dr. Phil here, but let's hear it. This guy had, in his dorm room in undergrad engineering, built an online cloud-based compliance tool for hedge funds with under 250 million to help them reduce their costs. It's a subscription service. The guy had a run rate of $5 million. He hadn't even graduated yet. I'm licking my chops at this business. This is fantastic. And then he said, but I have no time. And I never see my fiancée, and she wants me to come be with the family on Sundays, just once. But I'm doing my compliance downloads on Sundays, and I have to deal with my customers because I got to be back in class at 8 o'clock in the morning on Monday. Now the class is looking at me saying, okay, big guy, what's the answer? I said, everybody, let's be pragmatic. Which is easier to replace? Your business or your fiancé? And the shit hit the fan with that. But let me ask you something. Clearly that match was not right, because if you're going to get into a relationship with an entrepreneur, man or woman, it doesn't matter. You have to understand what drives them. It's not going to be a successful union. It's not going to work. I think he made the right decision. There's a huge sacrifice that people don't think about. Most people think, oh, I'm going to start a company, 2 months later it's going to be worth $1 billion, and I'm going to make a fortune. That is actually not what happens to 99% of people. 8 out of 10 fail. They have to do it 3 times. They spend a decade before they get their hit, or they work at one company for 15 years, and they finally get an exit. It's more like that, and the personal sacrifice is huge. There is no soccer game on Saturday. There's no Sunday dinner with the family. You're working because some guy in China or in India or some woman out there is kicking your ass, because we're in a global competition now.
Like if you look around the world, you might think, well, the happiest people are those where the standard of living is the highest. That's actually not the case.
Right.
And you think, okay, but why wouldn't that be the case? It's like, what do you want? Malaria and death at 40? Obviously not. But then you think, okay, what's the price you pay for a high standard of living? Well, that's easy. You virtually always sacrifice the present for the future. You're always working. I mean, you guys, you're fairly influential and you've got this good thing going, but like, it could crash at a moment's notice. You better keep your eye on it. And every day you're thinking, okay, this has to be done, and this has to be done, and this has to be done. And it pays off. I mean, you have a nice studio and I would presume a reasonably comfortable life, but it's not like you're not running on a treadmill to keep that going. And so that's security and it's health, but it isn't necessarily happiness, and it's certainly not necessarily freedom from anxiety. And I would say most people in the modern world, weirdly enough, have far too much to do. 2 career families and a couple of kids. It's like, man, you're done. That's 60 hours a week of flat out work.
Yeah.
So, and that can be too much. And then I also think, because our society is philosophically unstable, and that's sort of reflected in this polarization, is that people are doubtful about whether their lives have any meaning, for example. Why bother? What's the use of it? Who cares? It's like, what difference is it going to make in a million years, And life is hard, and if you just have a nihilistic viewpoint, then it's easy to be swamped by doubts and existential angst and all of that. And I think that's a mistake, because I think that your life can be very meaningful. It's proportionate to the responsibility that you take on. And you can learn that by watching when you're engaged in the world, and what works to sort of protect you from feelings of isolation and doom. You know, and a lot of the lectures I have on YouTube are about exactly that. So I think part of it is the complexity of the modern world.